It is the end of 2017, and this has been a great year for Software Engineering Daily. We're taking a break over the holidays, but we're going to be back after New Year's with a lot of new content. And for now, we are replaying a few of the most popular episodes from the 2.5-year back catalog of Software Engineering Daily. And we've removed the ads to make for a smooth listening experience. If you're taking some time over the holidays to listen to some Software Engineering Daily, take a break from your interaction with the family, go for a walk with a nice old episode of Software Engineering Daily, you won't have to skip over any ads or feel obligated to listen to the ads to support Software Engineering Daily. Consider this a vacation for the both of us. We have big plans for 2018. We've got new types of content coming. We've got more in-person events, meetups, but also more of the same. Long-form interviews about technical software topics. That's what I love to do, and I think that's what most people are listening in for. And as we make our way into the new year, I would love to hear from you and know what you're interested in hearing about for 2018, or who you are, or basically anything. Send me an email, jeff@softwareengineeringdaily.com. Join our Slack channel. You can find a link at softwareengineeringdaily.com if you want to talk to more engineers within the community. And you can also sign up for our newsletter, which you can find on softwareengineeringdaily.com at the top of the page. In the newsletter, we will let you know about upcoming live events and other developments within the world of Software Engineering Daily. As always, thanks for listening and happy holidays. Dwarf Fortress is a construction and management simulation computer game. It has a large fan base and was one of the inspiring pieces for the game Minecraft. Tarn Adams is a creator of Dwarf Fortress and works on the game with his brother Zach. Tarn, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Hi, thanks for having me.
When a player first opens Dwarf Fortress for the first time, what is the experience?
Well, they, having downloaded it from the website as a zip file and having uncompressed it into a folder on their computer, and they just click the start button, they get a text menu. After watching, I believe there's a little ASCII video they get to watch of dwarves hammering and one of them being set alight by some kind of magma or demon or something. It's not exactly clear. And then it gives them a little text menu and lets them create a world so that they can begin exploring.
What is the objective of Dwarf Fortress?
Well, we're trying to remain objective free. We're right. You're just it's kind of we aspire to be a fantasy world simulator so that you could just kind of this pie in the sky stuff. You click a button, it makes a giant world that you can explore in any number of roles and just kind of live through a imaginary history until you get tired of it, and then you can start another one that would be very different. But right now, it's all kind of milquetoasty, Tolkien-y stuff with just the ability to play as a colony of dwarves in this world that it generates. It does do a little bit of work generating the world, though.
So a quote that is commonly associated with Dwarf Fortress is, "Dwarf Fortress is a game that you don't win, but you always lose." Could you articulate this quote and talk about how it reflects in the gameplay as you are doing a certain type of task within Dwarf Fortress?
Yeah, so that's actually the motto, the official motto that we have in our help manual is "losing is fun," and the whole idea is that you don't want to you start a colony of dwarves at some point in the history of the world as it's ongoing, and you'd be digging into the side of a mountain and so on, and instead of having some sort of ultimate goal like produce this much treasure or vanquish this opponent or whatever, that you're constantly saving and reloading, say, to eventually achieve your goal after you've made mistakes. What we've got is you make your mistakes and you live with them or don't live. So, for instance, if you've been channeling a sort of a waterway to fill a cistern or something, and you make a mistake and flood your entire living quarters, and your dwarves do not survive, then it just tells you that your settlement has crumbled and has been abandoned, and that's the end of that game. But the world remains, and the settlement remains. So you can it's just become a part of history now. If some dwarves did survive, say you abandoned your fort manually after that happened, because there was no way to continue that fort profitably, but you have a few dwarves left alive, then you can abandon it. And those dwarves would actually still remain in the world. They could come as immigrants to your next fortress, or you could meet them wherever they've taken refuge if you play the kind of really incomplete small adventure mode we have, which is more of a RPG where you control one character and you can meet the dwarves from your old fortress, or you can go explore the ruins of your the game you had just played. And we haven't done too much with it, but we're trying to incentivize that a little bit. And but the central feature there is that we need people to play multiple games in the same world, or they're not going to see large swaths of the game. And
Does the way that you designed the user interaction in the gameplay, does it reflect any philosophy about life that you have?
No, it's about expedience. If maybe that's a philosophy of life, right? If we're talking about the text interface and that kind of stuff.
No, I didn't mean the text interface. I meant like the actual gameplay, like the fact that you lose, you always lose, sort of like in real life.
Well, if that's your worldview, certainly we've put ourselves, my brother and I, into the game in ways that we don't understand sometimes, and every work by anybody reflects their biases and culture and so forth, and that lives within the game. And so if there's a certain futility to it, a certain lack of competition, certain things like that we don't really go in for too much ourselves, then that's, I mean, it's going to be everywhere in there. I mean, the amount of gems and stuff reflects personal interests, the geology and so forth. So it's everything in the game is like that.
Interesting. Okay, we'll touch on that more in the future. But to give listeners a better idea of Dwarf Fortress, could you describe the visual aesthetic?
Well, people say it's like the Matrix, right? It's like you see all this gobbledygook, and eventually it'll make sense to you. It's text, right? Now, if people have played a roguelike game, one of the older ones, obviously, where it's still text graphics, they'll know what we're talking about. It's not different from NetHack or one of those games, except there's more information and more different sorts of things. So if you're playing your fortress and you're outside where your dwarves all start before they start mining in, you'll see a bunch of greenish commas and apostrophes and quotes and so forth, which represent small vegetation. You might see a circle for a brown circle, O, for instance, for a tree trunk, and you'll see your little dwarves, which are the IBM code page 437, the smiley faces that came with that. So we got to use those. It's not a typical ASCII character, but it's there. And so we have little smiley faces for dwarves running around, and they're all color-coded by profession. Now the professions aren't fixed, like it's not classes in an RPG, it's just their current best skills that they have, and they can learn anything. And then if you were to press the old roguelike greater than less than signs to page up and page down, you see a cross section, a sort of horizontal cross section. So if the ground is flat, you just see all the grass and tree trunks, but if you went up one, you'd start seeing tree branches, which are various lines and dashes and percentage symbols and so forth that are brown. But depending on the season, you could have leaves and flowers and fruit that are little colons and so forth of different colors. If you had an apple tree, you'd see little red colons on it. And then those, so you can look up through that, or you can go down into the ground, which just starts black at first. But then as you mine and explore, you'll start to see little walls and so forth, which are just, again, blocks. So it's all
like text.
Graphical. Yeah, it's text, but it's used as a graphical representation rather than like a Infocom adventure like Zork or something that is words written out. I mean, there are words too, but it's not a text game in that sense.
Right. So Dwarf Fortress is a procedurally generated fantasy game. What does that mean?
Well, procedural generate. I mean, there's a scale of scripted to non to procedural generated content in most games, right? Like for instance, artificial intelligence in even like a chess game or whatever, or a linear shooter is a procedural element. So games have almost all games have a procedural element, and then there's just like, now do you want to have people work on sculpted content, or do you want to let the computer make it? And we have a lot of procedural content. The world map is generated not just with an altitude map, but with rainfall and temperature and so forth, and then it kind of intuits the biomes from those numbers, and we have it can kind of flood fill out in the biomes and name jungles and things and put appropriate types of critters in them, and do an erosion simulation, have water flowing and so forth. And so that's as opposed to, say, Skyrim's sort of sculpted game map, although even that those games use sometimes procedural stuff to do unimportant trees and so forth, right?
To put a finer point on this, could you give a concise definition for procedural generation versus scripted generation within a game?
I don't think so, because it's a continuum, right? But
okay.
but the procedural generation means that you don't just have a finished asset sitting in front of you. You're going to have the game create an asset in some way or another, whether that's generating it with an algorithm from just one number and then through a bunch of code, or whether you have some information about, say, how minerals, their properties and so forth. It can use quite a large data set and a random number generator to produce an outcome. So your starting data may be scripted, but your outcome would still be called procedurally generated at that point. So it is a matter of degrees, really, with everything.
To exemplify this gradient, let's talk about how you generate a world in Dwarf Fortress. Like, the user sits down for the first time and is going to generate his world. What are the different parameters that get tweaked, and how are these seeds to a larger composite world that gets generated?
So the first thing it does is load all of the text files off of the disk, and this is the scripted portion, right? It loads creature definitions with all of their names and tissues and frequencies of where they're going to occur, biomes and so forth. It loads all the mineral definitions, like where does gypsum occur, what types of inclusions do we find sapphires, and that kind of, or where is it included, that kind of thing, right? So you have all this data. And then the game will generate additional data, randomly create more creatures and so forth. So you have this whole mess of different assets, objects, all kinds of stuff. And then the game has a routine it goes through for just creating a basic world map with, I was talking about before, altitude and so forth. And those parameters can be given to the game in a number of ways. You can... and the user can specify this if they want, or they can just leave it up to the game. You can say, I want to have a pretty fine mesh with really variable altitudes, and so you'll get kind of a mountain archipelago type thing, right, with deep oceans and tall mountains all over the place. Or you can load in, if you want, you can load in your own altitude map. People have done the Earth, people have done Australia, or all kinds of different places, right? They've done New Zealand, obviously. So you can load in data sets at certain points of the game, and so it once it has that, it moves on to the next stage, which is to do erosion. If you want, you can turn that part off too, and do vegetation, placing all of the different biomes, and then you've got a map. And at that point, it knows from the text files it's loaded. There are civilization text files that give parameters for a typical human civilization, a typical dwarven civilization, and for familiarity's sake now, so it doesn't turn into a giant gray nano goo or whatever, we have elves and goblins and all that kind of thing. and just a definition of civilizations for those. And then it places little starting civilizations around little starting settlements with historically important people and non-historically important populations. So there's like 200 people in each of these settlements. So some of them have names and some of them don't. And then they start to spread out and trade with each other, fight with each other, found new settlements, have accidents in the temple where they accidentally tip over a statue and get cursed, all manner of things.
Sure. Okay, so let's scale back to the origin story of Dwarf Fortress. What was going on in your life when you started engineering Dwarf Fortress?
So at that point, it would be October 2002. I was in grad school at Stanford doing mathematics, and I had originally failed my qualifying exams and didn't know if I would still be there. I had passed them by 2002, but back in 2000, when I was in a little bit of trouble there, I created a website because I'd been writing games forever and just started posting the development kind of log of this horrifying 3D game that was the precursor to Dwarf Fortress called Slaves to Armagh, God of Blood. And that was up there online doing whatever with like 50 people. And so in October, I had done a number of side projects by that time, and Dwarf Fortress was just going to be another side project that I worked on in grad school, threw up on the website, and continued with my math degree. And
what inspired you to create Dwarf Fortress?
There's kind of the giant fantasy game track, and then there's what Dwarf Fortress actually was when it started. The giant fantasy game track was just, games like Ultima, Starflight, the roguelikes, and our silly fantasy movies and like Conan the Barbarian and stuff, right? That's just kind of been what my brother and I grew up with, and we had been working on games like that since we were children, just little fantasy games. We had our first random maps up when we were like 12, 13 years old, doing this game called Drag Slay, which was 8 characters at the time, which is all we had for Dragon Slayer. And it was an interesting little game. Had a lot of the elements of Dwarf Fortress in it, but we'd always been working on something like that. And Armagh was the same way. Now for Dwarf Fortress, the short game, that was inspired more by this game called VGA Minor, which was a game where you kind of go down this little elevator shaft and dig out a little map, almost like Dig Dug or something. You're just digging these little tunnels in this vertical cross section and looking for treasure and so forth. And we're like, what if we made a game with a mining colony that looked kind of like that? And so we made this thing called Mutant Miner, where you find like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle mutagen canisters underground and start growing extra arms so you can mine faster and so forth. Very strange little thing, but that turned into a game about dwarves where you were going to make a fortress and then you were going to run a little adventure game to kind of get a high score afterward, where you just kind of explore your ruined fortress and find like journals and stuff to get the kind of full point potential that you had developed during the colony mode.
And what language is Dwarf Fortress written in?
It's a nasty C++ amalgam, the kind that develops when you learn object-oriented programming midstream.
So how did you end up using that mix of C and C++?
Well, I started without things like derived classes and so forth, and then found places where I'd want to use them. So for the items, for instance, the items in the game, like everything from a wheelbarrow to a leaf that's fallen off a tree, is now part of a larger kind of hierarchical class structure from just an item. But things like the dwarves are not. They're all, every creature in the game is just one type of thing. So that's an example of an older bit of code. And I'm not really sure, though, that I would always go with the hierarchy now. I kind of regret it for the items and are sort of undoing it as I go.
What's the trade-off there?
Yeah, it becomes rigid, right? It's like if you have a item that is a weapon, say, then if you want to start using it for things that are not in its main vocation, like if you want to use a sword to pry open a door, if you want to use a sword to cut a piece of cheese, then everything that you kind of thought about for tools you would have wanted to know for advance, and all the things start to become primitive again, and crawling back up the class tree. Now, this is just part of my lack of. Well, it's a combination of my lack of expertise and what word do they use? Elegance, elegant programming, and also but also the design specs on this game are kind of large and hard to think of in advance. So I think it's not just a personal failing.
Is this a commentary on hierarchies, class hierarchies as a whole, or do you think there's something particular about the class hierarchy that you engineered incorrectly?
That would be difficult for me to answer because I'm not good at this. So I think there's, but you always have 20/20 hindsight with decisions like that, right?
Sure, absolutely.
So I think that class hierarchies, if they're used properly, are probably a little more flexible, and you could spring around with your design a little bit more. But I'm not sure. I don't think that. The second you have a weapon class, you're saying that there's something special about weapons, and what I'm finding is that that's not true. That's just not how it should be. I think that there should be things. Now, I don't think that the hierarchy itself, that idea is bad, because I think there just needs to be more containment, and that's kind of what's happening with me with this sort of tool item I'm developing. There can be hierarchies within a larger container that do things and are kind of allocated on the fly. But it just needs to be super flexible, because I need to be able to add a whole new function that, it's just going to live down at the base, because everything can do everything if you're inventive enough with real objects. It's terrible. In the real world or whatever, you can, it's like the Martian movie where you start building crap out of other crap, right? It's
literally.
Yeah. So it's and again, this is just me inventing terrible computer science on the fly rather than being educated. So it's not. I don't think I have great observations here, other than the fact that in game design you're always respecing and always having to iterate. And that's probably true. That's true of a lot of different types of software. I'm just not familiar with them.
So, let's talk more about the collaborative engineering process, because you work on this project together with your brother. Tell me how that relationship developed. You were originally working on this at Stanford. Was your brother there also at the time, or?
No, we've been writing games together since I was 6 years old, and it's obviously those weren't great games, but it's always been. He was a programmer originally until I was around 13 or 14. He still programs a little bit, but not on our projects. I kind of overtook him on C. He never got into C. We learned BASIC together during the first 6 or 7 years, and so we kind of our relationship eventually became that we kind of co-design, and then I just kind of go off and program stuff.
Oh, okay.
And then we go back and talk about it. So there's not like some kind of weird version control system we have where we work together and have to do little commits at each other and stuff like that.
Do you have any system of version control just for your personal sanity?
No, people find that unusual sometimes, and I just don't. I do have version control in the sense that I back up every day, and then I go back, and if I need something, I grab it off one of the old backups. It happens so infrequently, though. I've pulled out old backups maybe twice in 3 years or something. That just feeling like I'm wearing thick gloves, which is a weird way to say it. I don't know, that I don't like having it in a black box that I have to put it in and then put it out. I'm sure it's safer, and there's all kind of analytics you can do and all kinds of useful things that I've been told about, but I'm just used to working with the code directly. I don't know. And
so you use physical backups, or you have like a Dropbox or something?
I use burn to the DVD, placed on the USB key, placed on the external hard drive, have in different locations. I don't like having it online. Everything gets hacked these days, and I'm not getting the code out there.
So Dwarf Fortress is not open source?
No, I haven't figured out how to do that. I have an academic inclination, right, having having worked there for years, and would prefer on some kind of ideal level to have all the code out there, but there are a number of issues I wouldn't know how to deal with. I wouldn't know how to. It's a problem with games generally. Kind of is, how do you deal with keeping the game on track, keeping the kind of core vision you have for the game, not in some kind of auteur sense, but just in basic playability and themes and so forth.
That's very interesting. So you're worried about the political process rather than like some sort of intellectual property kind of thing.
Oh, I was giving you a list. I was starting my list. Oh. No, everything's on the table. But yeah, the kind of community politics submissions issues are there. The how do I sustain this kind of just contribute money to us thing that some people have made work on open source, but with forking and so forth with games, it gets to be trickier. If a fork takes off because they make it, kind of have a wider appeal, just kind of clean up what I've got there now. I mean, that's great in the sense that more people would be able to enjoy the game, but I don't know if I could continue eating if that happened, right? So it's difficult. It's just, and it's not, there's no sure thing here, right? It's just assuming risk, and I'd rather not assume the risk.
So what part of what you're referring to here, if the listeners don't know, is that your subsistence is based on donations. So basically people, over time you put a PayPal button somewhere on your website and people just start contributing money because they were such huge fans of Dwarf Fortress. And over time it's evolved into just your full-time project, and you subsist off donations. So what you're saying is that you're worried that if you open sourced it, there would be a risk that the development would change in such a way that it wouldn't be a subsistence. The development and the donations for the development would change in a way that wouldn't subsist your current lifestyle.
Yeah, and it's not like I've traced out a specific path through by which that would happen, but I think it's a reasonable concern to have, and I think that people, when they ask me to open source the game, haven't considered it at all.
Right, and it's so interesting because it sounds like you've really fashioned a very particular lifestyle, and it sounds like exactly the lifestyle that you want to be living.
That's exactly right. That's why I quit mathematics. This works for me a lot better, and it's not a ton of money, but it's certainly more money than a lot of independent people are making. So I'm thankful that we can continue going, because it has been rough out there for a lot of people. Out there, you work on a game for a year and then you release it and you make $50 or $150, and that's it, right? So we've been very, very fortunate that people have kind of picked up on it the way they have, and that we've had interest from media and museum or whatever. That's just off the wall, but it's we've been really lucky.
So I'd love to understand a little bit better, how do you spec out, what are the requirements for your lifestyle? How much money do you need to make? Do you just say, okay, I need insurance, I need food, I need housing, and then you say, okay, this is how much I need? Or do you also say, I need to save some amount of money for the future?
Well, the saving is a luxury that we have almost attained. We're paying for, we just pay the rent, buy the food, and pay for web space and hosting of various kinds, and we don't really have any money left over. So we've been treading water for 5 years now.
Wow.
The amount of money hasn't really gone up, and it's gone up a little bit, but for the last 5 years we make anywhere from 40 to 60,000, and split that among two people and take into consideration how the taxes work and how the healthcare works when you have to pay for it yourself and stuff. There's not a whole lot left over.
That is some intense artistry. And so I'm curious, what would you do if some kind of black swan thing happened and you were all of a sudden in need of money?
Is that like wings growing out of my back? I didn't actually see the movie. I just heard about the strangest. I just heard the strangest parts of it.
That's so funny. Black Swan is totally overloaded at this point. I meant in terms of like the, the Nassim Taleb wrote a book about the Black Swan, which is like these low probability, high impact events. Like you lose your arm in a lawnmower accident, and like all of a sudden you have one arm, and you have to deal with all the medical risks and stuff, and that's something that's probably not entirely covered by insurance, for example.
Well, certainly not the bronze level plan.
Yeah. Do you just not think about that?
Well, I mean, you bad things happen, and we do have, without going too far into it, we do have troubles in our lives, like all people.
Sure.
And we make do. No, you don't. I mean, you think about as many eventualities as you can. I have a little bit of money that I save from my math job, and that's, it's not like we're ignoring savings. You just can't do it if you don't have money, right? Sure. So we have a little bit. It's a buffer that we could stretch out to a year if need be. Change gears at that point. We'd have to think of some other alternative, but we've been fortunate enough not to have had to do that. If some eventuality comes up and that money poof is gone, then we'll feel a little more nervous, but we'll keep going, I guess.
I bet the community would expand their contribution if something happened.
It's possible. I mean, they've certainly supported us this far. We don't really feel comfortable like trying to. We never really ask for money except at the bottom of the newsletter or whatever. Yeah,
that's exactly why they would be open to. I mean, I'm assuming, I don't know a ton about the community, but that's if it's enough of a labor of love that's received well by the community that they're willing to support you to the degree of $50,000-$60,000 a year. I think I don't know. Sounds like a type of community that has expanded to fill the problem that you need to tread water over time, and if that need acutely increased for a brief moment, I don't know. Probably.
Well, I don't know how long we'll keep talking about this, but it's interesting, right? Because if you're posting, and we do post all of our monthly totals, and now that we're on Patreon, like the monthly totals just sits right there for Patreon, right? It's a public number, and so we never really we've seen it a little bit that like you get up to a number where people feel like you're doing well enough, and then maybe they don't contribute, right? And we have bad months, and then it yo-yos up, and then people see it yo-yo up, and they're like, and then it goes back down, right? And so it is a weird dynamic, but at the same time, some people give to projects that are more successful, right? And money just kind of begets money itself. You see it with some of the ballooning Patreons, right? The most successful ones financially can make even more money because there's some that's some kind of stamp of approval on the content itself. So it's and not having a business degree or any business know-how, and just having a little bit of experience. So these are my observations, and if they're completely wrong, that's to be expected. We're not good at this.
Let's return to a discussion of engineering. Can you give me an idea of the design challenges around building a procedurally generated game?
Yeah, so you have to, I think you have to support all game development is really heavy into iterative development and so forth. You just have to constantly be able to change things and adjust your design goals because people will have observations about how badly the game is playing and so forth. Things will happen, but I think that's compounded when you have the game itself fighting with you. Right? It's things will come out of procedural generation that you didn't anticipate, and sometimes you want to keep them, and sometimes you want to foster their growth, right? Because you're just letting the computer kind of go, and it's sort of storyboarding for you sometimes when you see see how the world looks, or you see a river flowing and you start thinking about tributaries differently, and you're like, oh, we really need to kind of emphasize that the game knows what a watershed is, and then we go in and program that, right? And it wasn't even in the original kind of design process, and so you always will have. I mean, I get the impression that every project of any kind in programming has a kind of giant periphery of goals that will never be finished, and that it's always expanding outward. There's always things you can do, always things you can change. I think that's just exacerbated in this situation. Then there's the art of doing procedural generation itself as a kind of isolated design challenge without thinking of the larger game, but just making a procedure that does what you want it to do without being too uncontrolled and without being too narrow that you might as well have scripted it.
So you mentioned the changing nature of the goals, the periphery of your goals. How have those changed over time?
Oh,
for Dwarf Fortress,
we have. I mean, you have in your head with Dwarf Fortress, because you've consumed so many narratives and so much media that's related to fantasy, right? This is just the general person, whoever that is. That you have. I mean, having a vision for Dwarf Fortress is not actually that hard to do, right? You just have this kind of, people are going to go off and do stuff, and there's going to be all these great stories going on in the world and all that kind of thing. And so you can't say that the game has really gotten outside of that periphery, because that periphery is so nebulous and ill-formed that you're not doing anything useful by having it. But it's within that, within these boundaries, when you start to expand. Every little feature of the game has made us think of 3 or 4 other things that we can do. So the game started with our kind of RPG type thing. We were thinking originally with like the Dragsland Armok games, that you would roam the world and have like these kind of not quite scripted quest interactions, but there'd be these certain things you could do, and that it would just be fun to have other little patrols and armies run around and stuff, right? But I just spent the last 9 months adding dance forms and poetic forms and dwarves in discovering the Pythagorean theorem and stuff. So it just goes beyond that when everything touches on so many interesting avenues of exploration that it's the game has changed completely from what we first thought it would be.
And so I'd love to talk some more about the creative process, because I feel like when you're working on a self-directed project, there are some days where in my personal experience, you wake up and you're like, I don't know what to work on, or I don't know how to prioritize my stuff, or I just don't want to work on something. So how do you maintain motivation or organize your tasks?
Yeah, that I think, if I had to say that I actually have a talent that's made me successful in this, it appears to be that I don't have a motivation problem, and I don't I'm actually good at organizing things. So that is actually kind of striking into the heart of it for Dwarf Fortress, and kind of what distinguishes us maybe. Because when people ask me that, I don't really know what to say in terms of motivation. I mean, we're writing it because we're completely invested in it. There's no question about that. And when I wake up in the morning, that's what I want to do.
Do you have any task management tools?
Oh yeah. Now when you get to specifics, now that's with organization. That's a different matter, and it is important to, because I had trouble, especially earlier on, about going off on tangents, and still do. I did just say I added the Pythagorean theorem to the game, and that's not really good. But it's yeah. So we kind of organize. So our release schedule is about once a year, something like that, for major releases, and then we do a series of bug fix and tweak releases after that. And it ends up being about a year, even though we'd rather it be like 2 months or something, right? We plan a little arc of core things that we'd like to do to the game to make the game better in a specific way. For this release, it was we want to add taverns to fortresses so that dwarves can go off and have little personal lives of their own, and you can have visitors come, and it kind of ties you into the world as kind of a stepping stone to get into a sort of larger diplomacy and issues like that. So we have this, and also to use musical instruments, which have been in the game for like 7 years, and no one's been able to play them. So we have that as a goal, and we work toward that, and then we just kind of let things mushroom a little bit. So it turned into taverns and temples and libraries, and then that kind of had some, and also the art stuff that came out of allowing musical instruments to be played. It's like, well, what are they playing on the instruments? So we have, but we don't use any specific tools. I've written things in the past where I try and visualize the whole development notes. There's like 6,000 or 7,000 lines now of just development features we'd like to add that have kind of been added over 10 years or whatever. And I've put those into little nodes and have the little visualizer that you can kind of make links between them and categorize them. But that tends to be more trouble to maintain that than it's worth to even have it around. And it's just not, I always play around with that. It helps me think about what future features might be grouped together so that I can kind of use my time better. But because it is about that periphery of development is a structured and organized thing for as much time as you want to work on it to make it structured and organized, right? But you just have this list of crap at first, but then you can group it and you can work intelligently on that. But you can also paralyze yourself, and so I tend not to. I mean, I have more horror stories from people about over designing than under designing.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Because you can always iterate, right? You can always make a design. Maybe you didn't make. Maybe there are. I mean, there are definitely. And of course, this is from my perspective as the non-programmer that. There are definitely things that you can design better and that you could have thought about better, like the item classes and all that kind of thing. But people like to make white papers and very specific design documents before they even get started, and the projects just don't get off the ground a lot of times. And it's important. I mean, I tell people to get a game loop up. Try and get it up in one day. Just get going on even just moving something around so you can see and work with something. It's like a lump of clay, and then you can get it shaped up as you go, and you can see your results, and that's great for motivation. I mean, and when we're talking about motivation, if you can actually see the fruits of your labor, hour by hour, even if you're doing a few extra compiles or something, just to see what you're doing and to interact with it and give yourself ideas just by having it there, then it will help you make a variety of good decisions, whether it's with usability or just a whole new idea or way of seeing things.
I think that's so true, and I think that's like something that it's easy to get hung up on if you're a burgeoning developer and you're trying to figure out what project to build or what you want to architect. I think a really important thing for all the projects that I've worked on is figure out a way to structure your projects so that you get positive feedback like quickly and in small bursts, because it keeps you going.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's enough. Like I was saying, for us to just kind of work on the games, and that's something. But if you want to. If you want to have a job where you're like laughing all the time and seeing all kinds of absurd things, it's really, it does double the motivation, really.
So the creator of Minecraft, Notch Pearson, was inspired by Dwarf Fortress. What did Notch take away from Dwarf Fortress?
Well, first, to be fair, Infiniminer is the king of Notch inspiration, right? So we need to do a shout out to Zachtronics first. And then I really only have passing familiarity with Minecraft. I know there was like lava and water and stuff, and maybe that was kind of DF inspired. And I don't know how much crafting. I mean, there was Infiniminer. I don't know how much crafting there was in Infiniminer, but people building things and making a little house for themselves. I mean, that's kind of dwarfy. I don't know if that was in the original. So it is actually a hard question for me to answer. Since I'm not that familiar with it.
Did you ever play Minecraft?
No.
Fascinating. Do you play other games?
Oh yeah. I mean it's like every game developer, not so much now. It's often remarked upon that we don't have like a lot of time to to play other games, but we do try and play other games, and it's yeah. I mean, I play things occasionally that come out. I mean, I played the Soulsy games, and I played some random independent games that I came across.
When you play other games, are you enjoying it, or are you more hyper analytical and you're like, what can I take away from this to apply to Dwarf Fortress?
No, I don't. I try and enjoy myself. I mean, you can't help it sometimes, right? If you're a musician and you've been playing for 30 years and then you hear a song, you're going to hear it differently from other people. But at the same time, I still think games are fun. So, and really, when I play a game, I'm trying to kind of unwind and have downtime, the same way as when I'm reading a book or something. So I do enjoy it if it's the kind of game I like or whatever. So, no, not a lot of picking. I mean, I save my picking for, like, if people are talking about a game, I'll go watch a YouTube video of it for like 5 minutes or something, and you can kind of pick out the interesting ideas from that. You don't really have to play it. And you can consume design ideas a lot faster that way. You don't have to like install the game or fire it up or anything.
Oh yeah, it's definitely true. But in Minecraft, one of the things that people like about Minecraft is that people can build these very complex systems. Like I've seen these videos on YouTube where people will build like a calculator or just build like crazy stuff that you would never expect. Do people do this in Dwarf Fortress? Have you seen people build constructs that you would never have expected?
Oh yeah. I mean, I wasn't, like a big like builder of AM radios as a child, and didn't really think about logic gates and don't know any of that stuff really. So when people constructed a water computer in Dwarf Fortress with 75,000 mechanisms or whatever that could perform calculations and could have drawbridges coming down to be like a 7-segment display and displaying the answer like a calculator. That was amazing to me. And then I think someone implemented Conway's Life in Dwarf Fortress.
Wow.
With the display and everything. And that is mind-boggling to me. I know those things have been done in Minecraft too. It's like any game that has enough little mechanisms allows you to build a computer within it. So, and people do that now, that we have computers that are strong enough to run kind of a nested processor like that. It can be done in any game that allows it to happen. So, I think the because Dwarf Fortress is kind of unoptimized and also has a lot of stuff going on, I think the Minecraft computers are probably better. And you can also mod the game to do make a little mechanism that does a lot of the processing within one little tile to kind of make. You're
saying mod Minecraft or Dwarf Fortress?
Minecraft, because Dwarf Fortress doesn't support that level of modding. So. They're certainly, I think it's better in the Minecraft environment, and though we'll probably do some things with little gearboxes and stuff later. Who knows? It's really hard to say what direction we'll go.
So you studied mathematics. Did your approach, or did your study of complex math at Stanford, did that affect how you have developed Dwarf Fortress?
I think that having worked on in mathematics, especially, well, it would have been different, but for me it was a very visual field, geometric measure theory, where you think about things and rotate them in your head and all that kind of stuff. I certainly did develop a kind of visual capacity that I think has helped me a lot, and also just technically it's more the stuff that you learned earlier, like linear algebra. Linear algebra is incredibly useful for computer games, whether you're doing graphics or not. I mean, obviously it comes up when you're doing graphics with the matrices and so forth, but even without that, you still use the same principles to rotate things simply, and And also, I've used partial differential equations in limited capacity to solve certain problems.
You studied Banach spaces, right?
That was part of it, yeah. My thesis was written about flat chains and Banach spaces.
My stepdad did a lot of work in Banach spaces.
Yeah, it was right when I went to, started my postdoc is when I was kind of, would have been meeting all the cool functional analysis people, and also when I stopped caring and stopped doing research.
What made you stop caring?
I wanted to do Dwarf Fortress.
Interesting.
It was one of those things where I'm not a mathematical genius by any stretch of the imagination, and
what does that even mean?
It means that you're better than I am at math. There are people that are very amazing. Now, I know a lot of that is work, right? And genius isn't just a free lunch. There's a lot of work that makes you better at it. But my gears just don't run that fast in my head. I know that I'm not like top tier, right? And but there's a place for people like me in mathematics if you work your ass off. And so I could have been a workman-like third-tier mathematician, and that's not a bad thing. But that's for people that love math more than they love computer games. I like math, but I don't love math enough to do that, and especially given that I had another option. And so computer games was a natural choice for me. I've been doing math and computer games my whole life, and there was just I wasn't. If I were really, really, really naturally gifted, I could probably still be doing both. Not at the top level, but I could have been continuing to do math research and papers and so forth while still doing this. But Dwarf Fortress would have been lesser because of it, and the math would have been lesser because of it. I kind of like that I focused on one thing, and I think I picked the right thing for me.
So, what is the demographic of your fan base?
Oh, I don't know. It's hard to say when you don't collect data. The people I've met have generally been people in computer fields, generally, and just inherited all the demographics from that, I guess. So more men than women, more white than not, but not so much that it's like 100%. It's a pretty diverse crowd of people that play the game.
Well, what kinds of advice would you give to developers who might be listening to this and want to create their own game?
It does depend on their background to some extent. I think they should listen to the advice that my senior advisor gave me in mathematics, which is that if you have to love it to do it. People don't enjoy game development if they don't. If you don't want to do anything else. People wash out of game development at a pretty high rate. I don't know how it is for other computer jobs, but I think we were losing something like more than 50% after 10 years. Just go do something else, because it's if you're working for a large company, it's kind of oftentimes a miserable job. And
why is that?
Crunch and shitty hours, shitty conditions. People can replace you with a 20-year-old that thinks games are great. A lot of reasons. I don't know. I think it probably applies more to games than other tech jobs because there is this kind of fan love of the game.
There's this saying about academia that's like the rewards in academia, it's the competition in academia is so fierce because the rewards are so small. I think that might apply to video game development also.
Is that like fighting over scraps or something?
Well,
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's because
if you think about it, if there's like this endless chain of young kids who are really good programmers and will come in and take a job for $60,000-$70,000, then like it makes for some intense competition.
Yeah, of course, $60,000 or $70,000 isn't scraps either. So
Well,
it's
for developer jobs though, for like if you're a crack developer.
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. You narrow the field there.
How does indie game engineering compare to these big corporate places? Because I think the kind of game development that you and I are talking about right now is these giant corporation sweatshop type of jobs. But how does that compare to indie game engineering?
So I mean, my basis for comparison is limited, as since I haven't worked in anything but my own garage essentially. But you have with a smaller team and your own direction, or your own, like someone who's probably your close friend directing you, you have more freedom, and you also have to be able to respond to a greater variety of outside stimulus, right? So it's you're responsible for more things. You have to. I mean, someone's got to run the business side, and if you're doing, I mean, it could be your programmer or artist who also does the business stuff, right? I mean, it depends on how small your a group of people we're talking about. And there's yeah, but I mean, I can't speak. I'd hesitate to speak to the differences too much because I haven't worked in those environments. I've heard the bad stories, right, about large companies, but I mean, the people I've heard good stories from all seem kind of starry-eyed to me, but I don't, I'm not going to really.
Sure. So, what is the funniest story that has occurred in the Dwarf Fortress community?
I can't even keep track anymore because they post stories faster than I can read them. But I mean, there's the most influential one was probably the boat murdered story that came out of Something Awful back in 2007 when we were starting, which was just a kind of epic story about the fall of one fortress to elephants. And then the elephant was the original Dwarf Fortress kind of monster to beat all monsters, just because elephants are large, right? And so the game takes it from there. They're large. They can kill a dwarf pretty easily, and you set them on fire, and then you got real problems, right? So but I mean, for me personally, I always have the bug reports to go through, and I mean there was the I mean I when you get asked this question too many times, you start to tell the same story too often, right? So I mean my favorite one is still the executioner whose arms were broken, and so he still had a job to do, right? And in Dwarf Fortress they hammer people, right? They use a hammer to hammer people. It's kind of like reforging them anew when they're being punished, and this for obviously serious offenses. And so the dwarf that had this job, let's go execute the criminal or whatever with a hammer, he didn't have any arms, so he couldn't hold the hammer, but he was like, I still have to go do this job. And so he went to the criminal, the condemned person, and said, okay, now I'm gonna do the execute code, and the execute code, which assumes that he's holding a hammer, says attack. Attack with your preferred weapon, right? And so he started biting. And it was grotesque, and he bit the guy. And because we have these problems with bite attacks and so forth that made carp, for instance, the next most feared creature after elephants, because they would drag dwarves in the river, because a carp is a large fish. Now, it's not known for having giant teeth and so forth, but it's still big. So I mean, when they're full grown, so
they don't exit the water, right?
Yeah, but they can pull dwarves into the river,
okay,
and then chew them. But so what happened is the dwarf, not a small creature itself. I mean, dwarves are short and stocky, but they're still, Gimli probably weighs 250 or something, right? And so he bit the guy's arm off. And because it was going by size, they got big dwarfy mouths, and he bit the guy's arm off. And then he had the condemned criminal's arm in his mouth, and the executioner didn't go on to attack other people. There wasn't another execution. And the only code that says, hey, check what you have in your mouth is before you bite someone again. Because it was just for a kind of cinematic thing. So like if a dragon bit your arm off, then it goes to attack you again. It's like the dragon spits the arm out of its mouth and keeps going, right?
Yeah.
And so this dwarf never had cause to spit the arm out of his mouth.
Uh-oh.
And so he carried it around in his mouth for years. And because it was an inventory item, we had code to prevent like it's frustrating if you're trying to make your workflow more efficient in your fortress. It's frustrating if a dwarf is like carrying food. So that means they got to the point where they're carrying the food, but then just rots in his hands or something because there was a timer on it.
Right.
And so we stopped doing that. We're like, if you're carrying the object, obviously they've been taking care of it. Just stop the rot counters, right? And so there was no rot counter on this arm. So it remained perfectly preserved in the dwarf's mouth for a couple years. And then, so I get this bug report. It's just like, this executioner is carrying around this arm in his mouth. It's like, okay, so you have to go and put your Sherlock Holmes hat on and figure out what happened. And we got through it.
Oh, that's funny. Okay, so I guess to begin to close off, are there any games that you wish you had time to create? Like do you have ideas for games that you want to create in the future?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's coming up with ideas for games is like, I mean, that's a hobby for every developer, and they want to do, they want it, and non-developers too, right? It's like how people get started. Sometimes they're like, I've got an idea for a game, and yeah, so I've got a folder with hundreds of dead projects, little side projects. We try and work on side projects every day for a little hours, a few hours in the evening or whatever. Different genres. I mean, you can imagine Dwarf Fortress in space, for example, and some people have tried different angles on that, but it's such a wide open thing that you could have all kinds of interesting ideas how that can play out, and this and that, other things. I don't like talking about specific ideas too much. It tends to be a bad idea. Hyping people up in vaporware and all that kind of thing.
I had a conversation with Derek Sivers yesterday, and one of the things that he talks about is you should keep ideas to yourself. Like keep until they're executed. Like keep them to yourself because it's inhibitory.
I mean, I don't know. Inhibitory. I
guess you're talking about something different. You're talking about vaporware.
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons not to get too far into it, but I think there's also a lot of reasons that you'd want to have a nice open discussion about them, if they're not something that people expect out of you. Like if you're just shooting the shit, which would be something that would be fun to do, but in the current context, I don't feel comfortable like laying out what I've been doing on side projects because I've had a terrible track record now. Like I had released just a bunch of crap, but I had released like 14 or 15 things or whatever on Bay 12 games, and then Dwarf Fortress comes out, starts to eat a much more significant chunk of my time now that I have to keep it going, and I have started and failed to complete many side projects, so I'd hate to kind of get to pick one and say that that's the one I'm working on because I'm probably going to change gears on it, and it's just one of those things.
Sure. All right. Well, Tarn Adams, thanks for coming on to Software Engineering Daily. It's been fantastic talking to you. I'm very fascinated and proud of the work that you're doing with Dwarf Fortress.
Thanks. I hope to keep it going for another several decades. We'll see how it goes.